They say family is supposed to make you feel at home. But what happens when the very people you trust most shut the door in your face? My name is Emily Carter, and I thought marrying into the Hayes family would mean becoming part of something warm and welcoming. I was wrong. One cold November evening in Chicago, I discovered that my mother-in-law had planned a lavish birthday dinner. Crystal glasses, candlelit tables, the whole family dressed to the nines. Except me. I wasn't just forgotten. I was deliberately excluded. Before I tell you how that single act of humiliation led me down a dark, twisting road of betrayal, secrets, and shocking payback, make sure you like this video, drop a comment below with your thoughts, and subscribe to never miss a story like this. That night, staring at the photos they posted online, laughing, toasting, pretending I didn't exist, something inside me broke. And in that moment, I made a promise to myself. They would never humiliate me again. Not in public. Not in private. Not ever. What started as a dinner I wasn't invited to turned into a chain of secrets unraveling one after the other. Old debts, hidden affairs, and a lie so big it could shatter the entire Hayes family name. My husband was caught in the middle. My mother-in-law had no idea what I had discovered. And when the night of her next grand event came, I was no longer the quiet, obedient daughter-in-law they thought they could ignore. By the time my revenge was served, their world had turned upside down and they never saw it coming. So tell me, if your own family betrayed you like that, would you forgive them or would you make them remember? Like, share, and comment your answer below. And don't forget to subscribe, because this story is just getting started. Chicago in late fall has a strange way of holding secrets. The streets glisten with rain, the wind cuts sharply against your face, and every glowing window feels like a world you're not invited into. My name is Emily Carter. I am 32 years old, and I am a marketing executive for one of the city's leading lifestyle brands. I had what most people would call a picture-perfect life, an upscale apartment overlooking the river, a wardrobe that spoke of success, and a husband, Daniel Hayes, who came from one of those families that seemed polished from the outside but carried shadows behind their smiles. Before I take you any further into this story, make sure to like this video, leave your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss a tale of betrayal and justice like this one. Daniel was a financial consultant, the kind that worked long hours and brought home generous paychecks, but also the kind that carried the weight of his family's expectations like a second skin. His mother, Margaret Hayes, was the kind of woman who turned heads when she entered a room. Elegant, commanding, and always perfectly composed. To outsiders, she was a pillar of grace. To me, she was a cold strategist who believed that no one was ever good enough for her son. When I first married Daniel, I thought her frostiness would thaw. I believed time, patience, and genuine kindness could earn me a place at her table. But 3 years in, the cracks were no longer hidden. They were carved like scars into every family gathering, every holiday dinner, every subtle remark that told me I was tolerated, not welcomed. Our world was polished, yes. We had rooftop dinners, weekend getaways to Lake Geneva, gallery openings, and charity events where champagne flowed like water. But wealth, I learned, is a flawless curtain. It hides the dust, the fights behind closed doors, and the whispered words that slice deeper than any blade. Margaret ruled her circle like a queen, and her birthday was no exception. Every year, the Hayes family celebrated it as if it were a royal event. Lavish venues, designer dresses, and guest lists that read like a who's who of the city's elite. But that year, the invitation never came to me. Daniel mentioned nothing at first. I found out the way one finds out about betrayals these days, through a photo. A single image posted on social media, crystal chandeliers, gold-trimmed cake, Margaret in a stunning emerald gown, and my husband at her side, glass raised high. It wasn't just the exclusion, it was the message it carried. I was erased, invisible, and the worst part, Daniel hadn't even fought for me to be there. I replayed that evening in my mind again and again as the city lights flickered outside our penthouse. Why had this happened? Was it something I said? Something I did? Or was this Margaret's final move to remind me of my place? What the Hayes family didn't know was that I had my own ways of seeing behind curtains. My work in marketing had taught me more than how to sell products. I knew how to read people, how to track patterns, and how to find the cracks in a polished brand. And their family? It was a brand built on old money and newer lies. I started paying closer attention to Daniel's late-night calls, to the whispers between Margaret and her lawyer during a charity gala, and to the way certain transactions appeared and disappeared in the background of the family foundation's finances. I wasn't looking for revenge then, not yet. I was looking for the truth. But truth is a dangerous thing. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. The days that followed were colder than the November rain. Daniel apologized in his own way. Flowers. On the counter, a promise that next year would be different. But the air between us carried a fracture I could no longer ignore. I went to yoga. I met my best friend Clara for coffee in Lincoln Park. I smiled at work, but inside, a plan was forming. I wanted them to see me. I wanted them to remember the woman they thought they could discard. And most of all, I wanted them to understand that the night they excluded me from their table, they didn't just insult me, they set something in motion that would come back to haunt them all. What would you do if the very people who were supposed to welcome you into the family made you feel like an outsider in your own home? Would you let it slide? Or would you find a way to make them remember your name? Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, because what happened next would turn that family's perfect world upside down. The weeks after Margaret's birthday dinner felt like living in a house with paper walls. You hear everything, you see everything, but no one acknowledges the cracks. Daniel came home later than usual, his phone glued to his hand, his excuses as thin as winter sunlight. At first, I tried to believe him. I wanted to. But the silence at our dining table spoke louder than his words. The city outside our penthouse kept moving, taxis rushing past, the Chicago River reflecting December lights. But inside, something had shifted. I began noticing things I once overlooked. Calls he stepped out to take, messages that appeared on his phone screen, only to vanish seconds later. Margaret's sudden interest in a new business investment that Daniel couldn't seem to explain. One night, I found an email. Not meant for me, not meant for anyone outside their inner circle. It was a draft, never sent, but its words were enough to stop my breath. We can't let her control the assets. Not after what happened with the foundation. Keep her out of the paperwork. Her. That was me. The Hayes family had been planning something. Something that involved shutting me out not only from their table, but also from my own future. Daniel's. Accounts were tied to family trusts, businesses, real estate. And my name, I realized, was missing from everything that mattered. I didn't confront him that night. Confrontation gives people time to prepare their lies. Instead, I started digging. I used the very skills that had made me successful in marketing, research, timing, and the art of listening between the lines. I discovered that the Hayes family charity, Margaret's Pride and Joy, was not as spotless as it appeared. Funds moved through shell accounts. Events were billed but never happened. Donations collected but never reported. Daniel wasn't the mastermind, but he was complicit. The dinner I had been excluded from? It wasn't just a birthday party. It was a meeting, a gathering where they finalized plans to transfer assets before the year's end, locking me out completely. And then, the cruelty became personal. Margaret invited Daniel on a family retreat to Aspen over Christmas. The invitation arrived at our home, wrapped in embossed paper, tied with silk ribbon. My name was missing again. When I asked him about it, he said, "It's just family, Emily. It's complicated." Complicated. That word echoed through the empty apartment as he packed his bags and left me behind for the holidays. I smiled for the neighbors, and I hosted a New Year's Eve brunch with Clara. But inside, I felt like a ghost haunting my own life. The city fireworks exploded over Navy Pier while I sat in our living room, staring at the glittering skyline, wondering how long I would keep pretending to be the good wife, the patient, understanding daughter-in-law, while they carved me out of everything. The first week of January brought snow, and with it, a decision. I would no longer wait to be invited. I started documenting everything: receipts, transfers, emails. I found an old contact from my work, an investigative journalist who had once exposed a similar scheme for a major foundation in New York. I didn't give her everything, not yet, but I gave her enough to start asking the right questions. Each day I played my role, quiet, polite, and composed. Each night I built my case, and then came the breaking point. A letter arrived from Margaret's lawyer, addressed to Daniel but left open on the counter. It wasn't about family dinner or assets this time. It was about me. A clause in their family estate agreement that would allow them to restrict my access to marital property if they proved instability or untrustworthiness. They were setting me up, building a narrative, turning Daniel against me piece by piece. That night, Daniel came home late, smelling of wine and perfume I didn't own. He looked at me the way someone looks at a problem they don't know how to solve. "Emily, we need to talk," he said. I already knew what was coming. He wanted space. He needed time. He said the family was under pressure and that I wasn't helping the situation with my questions, my doubts, and my absence from their perfect photo frames. I listened. I nodded. I watched him lie to my face, and then I smiled. Because by then, my plan was no longer about being included. It was about ending the game entirely. I reached out to Clara, my one constant in this mess. We met at a quiet cafe near the Art Institute, the kind of place where no one listens, but everyone sees. I laid out what I knew. She didn't tell me to walk away. She didn't tell me to forgive. She said, if they wanted war, give them one they'll never forget. But war requires patience. Revenge, if done right, is a slow burn dish, served not in anger, but in perfect timing. So I waited. I attended every public event Margaret hosted in January, standing beside her with the same calm smile she once dismissed. I spoke with her friends. I volunteered at her charity gala, the same one bleeding money through fake accounts. I was no longer the outsider. I was the shadow watching from the corner of the room, collecting every whispered confession. Then came the invitation. Unexpected, almost mocking. A formal dinner to rebuild family unity is scheduled for late February. Margaret extended the olive branch herself. Daniel looked relieved, thinking things were finally settling down, but they had no idea what I had prepared. Every lie they told, every paper they signed, every name they erased, I had turned into a key that could unlock their empire and burn it from the inside out. The night of that dinner would not just be a reunion. It would be the stage where the mask slipped, the lights turned harsh, and the truth they buried would claw its way to the surface. Would I destroy Daniel too? That question kept me awake at night. I loved him once. Maybe part of me still did. But love without respect is a leash, and I was done being tethered to their perfect world. So I smiled. I wore the emerald dress Daniel once said made me look too ambitious. I called my contact at the paper. I sent one final message to Clara. Tonight it starts. And as I stepped out into the freezing Chicago night, I wondered, not for the first time, how many women like me were out there. Silenced, overlooked, dismissed, waiting for their moment. Mine had finally come. What they didn't know was that their family's carefully guarded secret was already in the hands of people who could ruin them. Tonight I would let them toast, laugh, and pretend again, just long enough for their world to start cracking from the inside. Because the sweetest revenge isn't loud. It's the silence before the storm. The February night was bitter, the kind that stung your cheeks and carried whispers of secrets through the city streets. The Hayes family estate glowed like a fortress against the darkness, grand columns, golden lights, and valet lines that hinted at old money's arrogance. Tonight was their stage, and unknowingly their undoing. I arrived precisely on time, wearing the emerald dress they once said made me look too ambitious. Inside, the dining room was set with long mahogany tables, crystal chandeliers, and the kind of laughter that hides fear beneath its echo. Margaret greeted me with a perfect smile, her diamond earrings catching the light as if nothing had ever happened. Daniel kissed my cheek, too light, too formal. I could feel the tension in his hands. What they didn't know was that their empire was already crumbling. The documents, the transfers, the charity's shadow accounts. I had handed everything over to an investigative journalist 3 days earlier. Tonight was not about confronting them. Tonight was about letting the truth arrive on its own stage, and shh. The guests raised their glasses, phones buzzed quietly around the table. 1, then 2, then 3. A ripple of whispers followed. Margaret's lawyer excused himself, pale as the linen napkins. Daniel's jaw tightened as his phone lit up with headlines, Hayes family charity under investigation for fraud and asset misuse. I sipped my wine, said nothing. Margaret's fork clattered against her plate. "What is this?" she hissed at Daniel, her voice low but sharp enough to cut the air. Guests exchanged glances. The room that had been filled with curated warmth, moments ago now felt like a glass house with stones flying from every side. Daniel turned to me, his face drained. "Did you?" I tilted my head. "Did I what, Daniel? Ask for the truth?" The beauty of revenge is not in the scream. It's in the silence. I didn't need to shout. The headlines did it for me. The journalist's story broke live on air. That very moment, broadcasting images of forged receipts, empty events, and Margaret's signature on documents she swore she never touched. Panic spread through the room like spilled wine. Phones kept buzzing. Guests whispered excuses to leave. Early. Margaret's carefully constructed world was collapsing in real time, and all I did was watch. Daniel grabbed my wrist in the hallway as chaos brewed behind us. "You ruined us!" he spat, his composure finally cracking. "No, Daniel," I said, quietly. "I reminded you who you married. A woman, not a placeholder. A partner, not a pawn." He released me as his phone rang again. His father, perhaps, or the family lawyer scrambling to stop the bleeding. I walked back into the dining room, calm as the winter night. Margaret stood frozen at the head of the table, her glass of wine trembling in her hand. "You did this," she whispered, her voice a mixture of rage and disbelief. I leaned in just enough for only her to hear. "No, Margaret. You did this the moment you erased me." And then I stepped back, letting the weight of her choices settle on her shoulders for everyone to see. The dinner ended in fragments. Guests slipping out, staff exchanging nervous looks, Daniel pacing by the balcony, his phone pressed to his ear. I picked up my coat, thanked the staff, and walked into the cold Chicago night without once looking back. By the time I reached the street, my phone buzzed. A message from Clara. "The article is trending. They're finished." I stood beneath the falling snow, watching the estate's golden lights flicker in the distance. For the first time in months, I felt the knot in my chest loosen. Not because I had destroyed them, but because I had survived them. Revenge is rarely about winning. It's about balance, restoring the weight that others tried to take from you. As I got into the waiting cab, I glanced back one last time. Behind those tall windows, they would spend the night scrambling to protect what was left of their name, their wealth, and their reputation. And me? I was finally free. Not because they had accepted me, but because I no longer needed their acceptance to define my worth. Sometimes the sweetest justice is served cold, without a single raised voice, without a single broken dish. Just truth, timing, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing they will never forget the night they tried to erase me, and ended up erasing themselves. The days after that dinner unfolded, like watching a storm retreat, damage left behind, but the air strangely calm. The Hayes estate became a fortress of whispers. News stations replayed headlines, social media turned their charity scandal into a public reckoning, and the invitations that once flooded Margaret's doorstep vanished like snow in the rain. For me, life didn't suddenly become perfect. Revenge, no matter how justified, doesn't give you back the years you spent trying to belong. It doesn't rewrite the holidays you spent alone or the trust you lost along the way. But it does something quieter, something deeper. It gives you the dignity they tried to take from you. Daniel tried to call me in the weeks that followed. At first, it was anger, then an apology, then silence. I didn't block his number, Not out of mercy, but because I no longer needed to hear his explanations. They were for him, not for me. We signed our separation papers quietly. No court battle. No spectacle. I kept what was mine. He kept what was left of his family name. Margaret? She stepped down from the charity. Her lawyers scrambled to salvage what they could, but the damage was done. For the first time in her life, she had to answer to the same public she once dazzled with designer gowns and carefully crafted smiles. I didn't celebrate their downfall with champagne. I celebrated it with peace, the first peaceful sleep I'd had in months. I started running again along the lakefront. I joined an art class I'd been too busy to attend. I rebuilt myself, not around their acceptance, but around my own worth. And that is where the real story lies, not in the downfall of the Hayes family, but in the rise of a woman who decided that being excluded was no longer a wound, but a wake-up call. In America, we grow up believing in fairness, in family, and in the table always having room for one more chair. But sometimes, life teaches you that the table isn't broken, it's built to exclude you. And when that happens, you have two choices. Keep knocking until your hands bleed, or build your own table and let the truth speak for itself. I learned that forgiveness is not always about inviting people back in. Sometimes forgiveness is about letting go of the need to be invited. My revenge wasn't about destruction, it was about exposure. I didn't set out to ruin them. I set out to stop them from erasing me. And in the process, I found the version of myself I had buried under years of polite silence. To those of you watching this, ask yourself, who holds the pen in your story? Is it someone else's approval, or is it your own courage? If you've ever been left out, overlooked, or treated as invisible by the very people who promised to stand beside you, what would you have done in my place? Would you have stayed quiet? For peace? Or spoken up for your dignity? Justice in real life rarely looks like the movies. It's not always a courtroom or a dramatic confession. Sometimes it's a headline, a truth revealed, or a quiet walk away from a table you never needed. In the first place, the Hayes family will rebuild, maybe. Daniel will move on, maybe. And I am already living my second chapter. One built not on revenge alone, but on self-respect, independence, and the knowledge that silence is not the same as peace. So I leave you with this. What is the price of being part of something that doesn't value you? How long do you let someone write you out of your own story? And when you finally choose to stand up, do you do it for payback or for your own freedom? Like, share, and comment your answer below. And don't forget to subscribe, because every story like this carries a lesson, and the next one might just change the way you see your own life.